You're about to see a great gambit invented by Garry Kasparov in the Sicilian Defense, and how he used this gambit and an octopus to win a historic match. But before we get into this, let me tell you that this is one of the most exciting and fantastical things you're gonna see about chess opening, and everything about it, including all the stories behind this game, are just fascinating. So before we get to the game where Kasparov dropped this bomb, let me set the stage. It was 1985. The reigning world champion Anatoly Karpov is facing a young challenger, 22-year-old Garry Kasparov. It was a 16th game of the match. The score was leveled, stakes are high, so was the tension. Everyone considered Karpov to be a favorite, and by winning this game, Kasparov took lead in the match, later won the world championship title, and became the strongest chess player on the planet for decades. So this game was actually the turning point. Karpov is playing white, and he opens up with his favorite move, pawn to e4. Kasparov responds with pawn to c5, his favorite weapon as black, the Sicilian Defense. Knight f3, pawn e6, pawn d4. Karpov is going for the main line of the Sicilian Defense, knight to c6. Kasparov is actually provoking Karpov to go for the move knight b5, aiming for this weak square on d6, which is also controlled by the queen. And as black goes pawn to d6 to cover it, white can play pawn to c4, and this pawn structure, known as Maroczy pawn structure, is considered to be favorable for white. It ensures white's space advantage, and it's hard for black to break open anywhere near in this game, which usually allows white to enjoy their space advantage and maneuver their pieces around and slowly build their position, while black's position is solid and yet a little bit passive. Anyway, let's see how Kasparov added a lot more fire into this game. So he first plays knight f6, attacking this pawn. White defends it by going knight to c3, pawn a6, just to kick off this knight from b5. White goes knight a3, and this is the position where Kasparov played the shocking move. Now, this whole point of this pawn structure is basically to not let black break open with the move pawn to d5 and provide more space and freedom for his pieces to maneuver. And yet this is exactly what Kasparov does. Like, initially, if any random Joe played this move, we would just think that black miscalculated the quantity of attackers that white has over this square. But of course, if Kasparov plays it in a world championship match, we know that things aren't that simple. Actually, Kasparov said that he found this idea while he was on a flight from Baku, Azerbaijan to Moscow on his pocket chess. So yes, it was that fascinating time when people actually had to think themselves about opening novelties instead of just turning on Stockfish. Anyway, that only gives more credit to Garry for finding this idea. Initially, it's also quite difficult to comprehend what was the point for black to give up the pawn and to let white attack this knight. Anyway, Garry goes knight b4, and for now he wants to get this pawn back on d5 because he's attacking it this time a couple times. Now, actually, Garry used this gambit in the 12th game of this match, so a couple of games earlier in the match, for the first time. And then Karpov played bishop c4, and after that Garry responded with bishop g4, bishop e2, and it led to like lots of exchanges here and there, and it was a quick draw. But what's fascinating about this game is that Garry used this seemingly dubious idea for the second time in the same match, knowing that Karpov and his entire team had about a week to analyze this position intensively at home and find the best way to refute black's idea. Therefore, playing it once again might seem suicidal for Kasparov, and yet he's going for it. So what's the plan? This time Karpov goes bishop e2. He decided not to hold on to this pawn, but let black capture it. And in this case, the position would become more or less symmetric, but thanks to his extra move, white would be a little bit ahead. Garry refuses this idea, and he just decides to develop and to play in a more gambit style, where he says, alright, you're a pawn up, but I'll instead prioritize more my development, and I'll try to have more active position. Karpov says, well, if you don't want to defend this, get back this pawn, well, then I'll defend it. And now I don't get it back at all. I'm just overprotecting it completely. You can never get it back, and so I'm just a pawn up this important central pawn. Still, it's completely unclear what was the entire point of black giving up this pawn for no reason. Anyway, Garry keeps playing bishop f5. From here, the bishop performs two important functions. So first, it cuts off the c2 square, and therefore white cannot relocate their knight from this passive position on a3 to c2. Secondly, it also aims at this d3 square, where black could land their knight or bishop and start creating some threats. Anyway, of course, right now it's not that dangerous, and Karpov just goes bishop g5, developing his bishop, pinning the knight. Kasparov goes rook e8, putting a rook to the open file. Also, just in case, maybe preventing knight e4 from happening because of this pin, the knight couldn't move, so rook e8 provides some additional control to this square. And slowly but surely, we can start seeing Kasparov's brilliant positional idea. Karpov played queen d2, Kasparov goes b5, taking away one more square from this knight where it could possibly go to, and therefore now this knight is kind of out of game. Can't go here because it will be captured by the pawn, can't go here, it will be captured, can't go here because it's controlled by knight and bishop, so it can only undevelop back to b1. Of course, Karpov doesn't want that, he goes rook d1. Now, his position is really strong, he's fully developed, he's up a pawn, it's a strong central pawn that is ready to march forward, and he's solidifying it with his battery of a rook and a queen. Looks like Kasparov is in trouble, but Karpov underestimated one important animal, an octopus. Kasparov played knight to d3, landing this knight on d3, and it was later called an octopus because this knight is controlling a whole range of squares in white's position, not letting white to move, not letting white to do anything really. And that is the idea that Karpov completely underestimated, which is fascinating because Karpov was a great positional player. That was his core strength, and therefore outplaying Karpov positionally is definitely something spectacular. Besides that, black also has a straightforward threat of b4 with a double attack to white's knights. Therefore, Karpov goes knight to b1, avoiding this threat. Now pawn to h6, forcing white to do something about this bishop. Karpov drops it back. Now pawn to b4. Kasparov keeps advancing on all sides of the board, and he keeps pressuring white's pieces. White goes knight to a4. By the way, there is also one interesting thing. When you look at games of such strong players, sometimes what's interesting is not only a move that was played in the game, but also a move that wasn't played in the game, because there you could see the true brilliancy of player's idea. For example, here, why couldn't he go to e2 with his knight? Because generally it is said that a knight on the rim is deemed. White already has one knight on the rim, and generally speaking, you don't want to place the other one on the rim. So why did Karpov play that instead of playing knight e2 to a more centralized square? It turns out that Kasparov, including the moves h6 and bishop h4 on the previous move, got ready for this. And now black could all of a sudden start pressuring this bishop. As it goes back, he could go pawn g4, and now white's pieces are so restrained that they prevent one another from moving, and this bishop from f3 has no squares to go to, and it can be captured. And it all became possible because, let's take it back, because Kasparov at this point included moves h6 and bishop h4, as without them the move pawn to g5 would not be possible. I mean, it's just such a next level chess, which is hard to comprehend for us mere mortals, but we can only envy the great understanding of the greatest. Anyway, so after b4, white had to go knight a4. Now after bishop d6, we can completely evaluate Kasparov's strategy. He actually fooled Karpov into thinking that he's got this extra pawn on d5 and this is an asset, while during this time he used this octopus strategy to completely restrain white. And now if you look at Karpov's position, I mean, it's embarrassing. He can't really move at all. Like this knight from b1, can't go here, it's controlled by this pawn. This knight from a4 also has nowhere to go. Like all these squares are controlled by black. This one's by the bishop, this one's by the queen. White's queens and rooks are controlled by the octopus. So the octopus is controlling everything here, all around. So they can't move really. And black is controlling the e-file as well with his rook. The bishop from f3 also, I mean, could go back to e2, but it doesn't do anything. So really, white has almost no space to breathe, no position to move to, right? It's ridiculous, especially for a player of caliber of Karpov. He goes bishop g3, as this bishop is nearly the only piece that can move at all. Anyway, black plays rook c8, this time controlling this square, this file. White goes b3. He wants to get his knight back, and even though right now white's position is greatly restrained, actually if white manages to play knight b2 and get rid of this octopus from d3, white's position will become not that bad, and he may actually find a way to untangle his position. Therefore, black still needs to be extremely precise. And what Kasparov does is he's going g5. He wants to play g4 and he's threatening to start attacking because he knows that he needs to create threats quickly. Karpov traded off on d6 and he played pawn to g3. His idea was that if black were to play pawn g4, the bishop now has an escape square to g2. However, Kasparov noticed that the move g3 also has a downside. Now this f3 square is not defended, and he plays knight to d7. He wants to maneuver his knight to e5 and from there to start attacking all these weak light squares on the king side. Karpov played a prophylactic bishop to g2, securing himself from this knight to e5 threat, but now Kasparov plays queen f6, another brilliant positional move. From here it takes away this b2 square, and therefore Karpov can no longer move knight b2, bring his knight from the edge into play and get rid of this octopus. So queen f6, a really cool move that keeps white completely restrained. I'd played a3, trying to get rid at least of this pawn. Kasparov says nope, let's keep it there. And after this exchange, nothing happened. This knight from b1 still isn't going anywhere. Karpov played queen a2 this time. Now he's trying to at least bring this knight into play. He wants to go knight d2 and remaneuver the knight, I don't know, maybe to c4, something like this. And yet again, Kasparov needs to be careful with that. At this position, Kasparov played another brilliant move, which is really difficult to notice. It is a move bishop to g6, and it's not that it's hard to find this move, but it's hard to understand what's the brilliancy of this move. And here it is. Kasparov here realizes that Karpov is going to go knight to d2 and bring this knight into play. And by going bishop g6, he says, hey, if you want to go knight d2, go ahead. In this case, I would play rook to e2, and now not only I'm pinning this knight, but also I'm attacking this pawn on f2 with my rook and my queen. And moving his bishop off the way allowed black to include his queen into this attack on the king side, which makes white's position losing. So that's how this little bishop move, just one square back, actually ruins white's plan of somehow rearranging his position. Karpov goes d6, trying to get rid of this annoying pawn. Finally, he realized that this pawn only did harm to him, and he wants to at least open a diagonal for his bishop and maybe seduce black to take it and to slow down his attack. But Kasparov still doesn't care about this pawn, just as he does it throughout this entire game. And he goes g4. This time he wants to utilize these weak light squares, and he wants to maybe go at some point knight e5, knight f3, and go after the king. So white played back queen d2. White is concerned about his king safety and he brings the queen back. Also the knight d2 idea failed anyway, so white is just shuffling around because he can't do much anyway. And Kasparov's playing king g7, defending this pawn just in case. Maybe black could have played something else, but black is not in a hurry because right now white has almost no normal moves to play. Karpov gives it a try with the move pawn to f3. He's tired of just sitting and waiting, he wants to open up some files. While f3 may open the file for his rook, this also exposes his king, which is an obvious downside. And now Kasparov takes this pawn on d6. Not even that he wants the pawn that much, but rather he wants to free up his knight so that he doesn't have to blockade this pawn and the knight can jump forward and take part into the attack. That's why he finally decided to take it. And after pawn takes, yes, white opened up one of his rooks, but now queen to d4 check allows black to utilize the weakness of the f-pawn movement. Now the king is exposed, and after king to h1, black goes knight f6 and says, hey, you know what, I'm going to utilize these weaknesses. And from f6, the knight is ready to jump either to g4 and then maybe f2, or maybe to e4 and then f2, and in both cases it's quite deadly. White tries rook f4, and it's a little tactical trick, not even a trick, it's just using the fact that the knight is pinned, can't move because the queen is pinned. And the final part of this game is equally spectacular. Initially, Kasparov demonstrated the positional masterclass where he completely restrained Karpov, and now he's turning it into a tactical masterclass. He's not going to back down, he goes knight to e4, threatening the queen, as well as threatening to jump with one of his knights to f2. You can say that Garry is horsing around quite effectively. Finally, white decided that enough is enough, and he decided to take this octopus on d3. It's worth noticing that the knight was standing there in the heart of the white's position for 18 moves, which is quite a lot and rare thing, so Karpov was really annoyed by it, and finally he took it. But in this case, after knight to f2 check, it actually allows black to get the queen on the next move. Rook takes f2, now bishop takes d3. At first it may seem like black has just won a queen for 2 minor pieces and this should be enough to win, but it's not that simple, because now after rook to d2, white is trying to make use of this pin and they hope to get the bishop, and then with 3 minor pieces for the queen, they'd be absolutely fine. But Garry found a beautiful way. He doesn't care about the bishop, he instead plays queen e3, ignoring the bishop completely, allowing white to capture it, and after that what he wants to use is the weakness of the first rank, and he wants to get to white's king. But even here, he plays another beautiful move, rook to c1. It's completely mind-blowing that instead of trying to defend his bishop, he gives it away, and now he gives up the queen. So what's the point? Well, if white takes on e3, like temporarily he's up 3 minor pieces, but he starts to lose them rapidly within the next couple moves. So first rook takes d1 check, bishop f1, then he loses the rook, and on the next move he's gonna lose some more pieces. This b3 pole is also falling, it's kinda everything crumbles. In the actual game, Karpov didn't take the queen, he instead played knight b2, trying to defend something here, but Kasparov still didn't care at all about anything, about material in particular, and played queen f2. This time he's giving away the rook, because he just wants to play rook e2 maybe, or rook e1 and get to the king. Now Karpov's going knight to d2, and here, after they straight and rook to e1, Karpov finally resigned because of the checkmate. Now rook e1 is a check to the king, and if white covers somehow, then it's going to be a checkmate like this, and therefore white resigned. Let me know what you think about this game, or if you ever used an octopus in your own games. Also, if you wish to increase your positional understanding of chess, feel free to attend this free masterclass by clicking the link over there. And if you enjoyed this game, there is also one more game that you may check right here, when Garry Kasparov thought for 83 minutes about a single move in his another game against Anatoly Karpov, so check it out right here.